Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting for September 23rd, Frederick County Board of Education. I'll call this meeting to order at 11:02. We have, first thing on our agenda is the draft minutes from August 19th, 2020. Do we have consensus from my colleagues? Those minutes are good. Thank you very much. I understand we have no public comment at this particular point. We did have an email sent to our public comment area, but it was about a subject that was not pertinent to the policy committee. It was pertinent to the entire board, so I responded to that email and copied the board on that. So first thing up is new policy 516, teaching controversial issues. We dealt with that in our last meeting to get us started, and we sent copies of Baltimore, Washington, and I think Howard County to both Ms. Barrett and Dr. Jarman. And Ms. Cannon has been working on consolidating a new policy and reg that incorporates some of that language, and we gave a few edits last time. So Ms. Cannon, if you would like to get us started.
Also, Colleen Bernard is here. She's our curriculum specialist for social studies, and she reviewed both the policy and reg and provided some edits, and those edits are within both documents today. And certainly if you have any questions, either she or I can respond to those questions. And so I think what you shared with me is kind of your best, what you kind of gleaned and pulled from the sample regs, and then some things that were based on some typical advice that we've given in the area relative to teaching controversial subjects. So you'll see, as far as providing definitions of a controversial issue or curriculum, but I think the policy statement, all things will flow from the policy statement, that we recognize students, to prepare for effective citizenship will often encounter issues that may be considered controversial, and that we encourage the examination of controversial issues related to board-approved curriculum in an impartial, objective manner, and recognizes the instructional value of historical artifacts. And so that would be an area that would be the typical advice that we would provide. And I think a triggering event was a concern that was raised over the display of a Nazi flag in a social studies classroom, and what we would ask is the pedagogical value, the objective in the lesson, that part of history. And I think then the board shared that it would be good to articulate what is the advice and counsel so that we can consistently apply it and share it both in policy and reg. And so that kind of was our attempt to do in the documents that you have. And if you have any questions or edits, the next part will be then taking it to the full board in a work session.
Well, I have one question, and I'd like a little discussion with my colleagues about, this is on the policy, on the back page under compliance with C. Mm-hmm. Principals are responsible for developing and implementing school-based procedures for approving controversial issues to be considered in the classroom, which are beyond the approved curriculum standards. That sentence to me implies that teachers are going out and about and above and beyond, as opposed to one of the other statements that we have in here is that it is appropriate to the curriculum. And I don't think teachers are going to be going out and about above and beyond, which that kind of implies. And then it also implies that the principal is the only one dealing with, and it's procedures for approving. If we have an event that occurs in the evening, do we need to get approval to discuss it in our first block class? I'm not sure that that's really necessary unless it's something that the teacher believes would create backlash. Mm-hmm. In the first two are supposed to be responsible for ensuring that information from all views, mm-hmm. so in that case it's there, mm-hmm. responsible for ensuring that their personal views aren't there. And the last one is curriculum, oh, no, that's the wrong one. Mm-hmm. But I was saying that it applies to curriculum. There was another statement in here that said that it had to be appropriate to the curriculum. Civil rights legislation, for instance, or when there was a point where we had creationism and Darwinism as issues in the community that ended up in our science classes as a controversial issue, but it's, did that need approval? See, the verbiage of C kind of bothers me, and I was looking at both Baltimore and Howard where they had the Division of Curriculum and Instruction shall provide assistance and guidance to principals and teachers concerning the teaching of the issues, but it doesn't say anything in there about permission. It does have bear the primary responsibility for the development of school procedures for the teaching of controversial issues. So I'm looking at procedures and, for instance, when we had the gun issue, geez, long time ago, in my classroom, we had a Civil War reenactor bring a weapon. And of course, at TJ, everybody in the community saw him walking into the building with a long gun. So shortly thereafter, we developed procedures for how to get that approved.
Right.
We also,
I never know it was your class.
he walked in the classroom, I shut the door and walked into the hallway waiting for the principal. He was there in a matter of minutes.
It was an innocent mistake.
Yes, actually, yes, he's a
Yeah.
reenactor who worked at, well,
And he knew
anyway.
the kids would think that was cool, right?
They did. We also had, at a period of time when Islam was an issue in our community, and Imam Hendi came to one of our schools, we had permission for that. We have policies to give permission slips to allow students to participate in these things. I want this policy to be more guidance for when a teacher is flipping that coin. Is this,
Yeah.
you know, this happened, my kids are talking about it, how do I address it? As opposed to, on the 23rd of this month, we're going to have this speaker come in, and these are the guidelines, and these are the permission slips, you got to get them signed.
Right.
So,
that edit was based on some feedback that Ms. Bernard shared with me, and so if, are you comfortable responding to that, Colleen?
Sure. I think
Okay.
the edit that I had provided was to add that piece about beyond the approved curriculum standards, so that, if I recall correctly, it had stopped prior to that, so that anything beyond what we have in our approved curriculum would be a conversation with the principal about whether or not that would be appropriate. We also, of course, have our guest speaker policy and reg that would govern and come into play in this regard.
I must say, I'm concerned about the principal piece too. In D, curriculum instruction and innovation staff are included. And my concern about principals and approval is that we're already seeing with certain policies that principals are choosing to do their own thing. And so we're not seeing things being done systemically. And so I would have concern if it's appropriate for curriculum, or even if it's beyond curriculum, would not curriculum staff be better positioned to review something like that than a principal? That's just, and I do want to say thank you so much for putting in the role of public education in preparing students for effective citizenship.
here, here.
Thank you.
And so I guess I'll just defer, you know, what is our practice when a teacher wants to teach something that, you know, might be considered in a controversial topic? Typically, is the principal conferring with the curriculum specialist, and so could we word that differently?
I think we could. I think we could word it, principals in concert with the appropriate curriculum specialist.
In consultation with the Division of Curriculum and Instruction.
I think that would
That's
be
the
good.
verbiage from Baltimore.
Okay.
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just.
Well, I mean, I hear too, I mean, I hear folks saying when folks are talking about teaching a controversial subject, but then when Mr. Beninsky talked about his experience in the classroom, you know, there's the Civil War reenactor coming in, but there's also, and you know, your experience in the classroom, you know, the day after something happens in the community.
Right.
Or September 12th. I mean, so you're not talking about a curricular issue then, right? You're in social studies class, or you have to talk to your students. And so in those cases, you know, I don't see a teacher leaving the curriculum, right? I see them, discussing I mean, I hope teachers do this, right? Process things with students and
Yes.
try to find the edges of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and do that in the atmosphere that's comfortable. So in those cases, if a conversation comes up, I think the only real responsibility is to make sure that it's, comfortable for folks and that they
fair.
let the principal know. Like, they let the principal know that this has happened and that students were upset or affected. And, I mean, that's the kind of,
And one instance that I remember that's very much along the lines that you were talking about is we had a lockdown at TJ High. I was teaching a French 2 class in the spring of 2017 at TJ High. And we had a lockdown. And after 10 minutes, the kids were like, Dr. J, this is not normal. This is not normal. And something's going on. And we were under lockdown for 15 minutes. I had one student who went into a full-blown panic attack. And then we got the announcement that the lockdown was over. Continue with your class. There was no way. There was no way after 50 minutes of intense drama in that classroom that we were going to do French. There was just no way. And for the mental health of my kids, we had to process what just happened. And so that is certainly not in French 2 curriculum, but I was given the go-ahead by the principal to continue with my lesson. But I had brains in that class that were no way ready to learn the conjugation of the verb être in the imperfect tense at that time. We needed to
Or ever.
we needed to debrief. And so I don't know where that fits in, because my talking to the kids about a lockdown and
Right.
shooters, live shooters and active shooters, that's certainly not in French 2 curriculum.
No, but it's appropriate.
Yeah.
It is appropriate for teaching of an issue to help our students to grow and understand. We face these things kind of regularly in schools, and principals usually understand all that. We had the same thing when we had the Beltway shooters.
Yeah.
We had that issue.
Sniper.
I remember sending out a memo to all my teachers to be compassionate, to be understanding, to listen to students, and not project anything, because nobody knew what was going to happen. But we had students whose parents drive up and down this road to the CIA, to Washington, D.C., to Montgomery County, and those are things you have to talk about. And is that controversial? It might be to some. That's why we have to kind of define it. Is it outside of the curriculum? Yeah, it is, until they were captured, and then it was perfect for the curriculum, because we dealt with law and order, and we dealt with weapons, and we dealt with federal versus state legislation, and so it was appropriate for our government classes. So the procedures part of this, where you had the regulation, the first paragraph has principal in conjunction with, but it leaves out curricular staff. And I felt that other paragraph that I mentioned leaves out curricular staff. And I just want to make sure that that principals that have a background in science or language or social studies have a resource to go to get assistance, because they don't need that. First of all, they don't need this burden on them. Secondly, they may not want this burden on them. And third, the experts are the people in this building. So,
Yeah, so I'll do a corresponding modification to the reg as well, Mike, thank you.
The example that both of you just gave is, if we look at the definition of controversial issue in the policy, it's a point or matter about which there is significant opposing viewpoints and/or multiple perspectives. So, the only place that I don't want to end up with this, so if we are to take the example of a Nazi flag, for example, if that Nazi flag exists in the classroom, if it's brought out for a class, or if it exists in the classroom, is that classroom considered to be comfortable and free of bias and prejudice, right? Because without a lesson or an explanation, do students feel comfortable, and should they feel comfortable, So I think we have to be, where the rubber meets the road here is the attachment of things to lessons and conversations. And we've had controversies in our community, and, Mr. Beninsky brought up Islam. Well, there's not really an opposing viewpoint there, right? I mean, it's a recognized world religion, and I don't know what the opposing viewpoint is, right? So we welcome people from all religions and creeds in our country and in our school system, and so I'm not, and I'm thinking too about a lot of things and how teachers take the prejudice out of those conversations, right? So if you're talking about someone's identity, people's identities aren't controversial. Racism is controversial, but being a black person isn't controversial. Your race is not controversial. And so I think we have to be careful about that. And I don't know how to put that into words, but I know our teachers do their best with that kind of thing.
My hope was that the procedures in the building that would be worked on between the principal, the teacher, and the curriculum office would identify that if you're going to have the Nazi flag out or the rising sun of Japan out for World War II, that you bring it out for a lesson and then you put it away. And that's the procedure that they come to. And in that discussion, I'm leaving it up to them, the people that are right there, the principal, the curriculum office, and the teacher. And that's our hope, is that they would do that. Rather than us censoring and banning that whole idea, we leave it up to them to come to a good point where they are recognizing that they're teaching from it and trying not to be offensive. Same thing with some other symbols, Confederacy being one right now. It wasn't a long time ago, but it can be. And political signage, things like that, that you can bring out to teach a lesson. But I certainly would not want any of our government teachers to have some of the political verbiage on their boards for a long period of time, but to show it on the screen and lead a discussion and have children answer questions about the different types of commercials that were created. There's wonderful frontline videos that show the different commercials over the years. One from Lyndon Johnson where they I shouldn't get into the politics of it, but Spiro Agnew's name was on there, and there was nothing but laughing for 30 seconds, and it dealt with an election. And then you get students to say, okay, what did they say? They said nothing. How does that affect the vote? So those can be controversial. At the same time, they're part of the teaching process, and the procedure to go through them, I think, would go through the curricular office and the principal. So that's my take on it. Ms. Bernard, do you have something else?
I think just to add to that, under 4B, I think that section might speak a little bit to your concern, Ms. Barrett, where it says controversial issues must be presented in an impartial or objective manner, and then that other piece had been added in.
Stated curricular objectives.
Yeah, and the use of historical artifacts will be within the context of a stated curricular objective, and that differentiates those historical artifacts from room decor.
That's a good point.
And that would be my take on reading that.
So, Ms. Cannon, what would you like to do with this next?
I would love to schedule it then for a work session, if you feel like, since this is a new one, that we should put it on for discussion, or if you think it for consent. I'm not sure how, I know we're modifying agenda setting. What would you like to do?
I think work session. I think
Okay.
that everybody needs to
Awesome.
weigh in on it.
Yeah, good. Well, and I'll bring my dear friend Ms. Bernard with me. Pardon me?
Always, always.
Yeah, so we'll schedule this for discussion at the next upcoming work session. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Colleen.
Certainly.
Okay. The next one is policy 115. We didn't have a lot of, we just had an edit relative to updating a title, but because this policy is not old, and I think we really put a lot of time, attention, and effort in it when we drafted it. But within that, we indicate that we will review this every 2 years as a board. And so the 2 years have come around already, and so I wanted to make sure that that was scheduled, so you could see the modifications. I did get input, because it does say that, this would be regularly reviewed by the Executive Director now of Public Affairs, Dr. Cuppett, who is here, and he did not have any recommended changes, and then Ted, our Director of Technology Infrastructure. And this is an area where we not only developed a policy and a reg, but we did some training. We did a training video. We continue to use that training video with our employees, because we have gotten some good questions, and so I think that was, it was good to have a policy and reg to give staff direction. And so that's kind of where we are 2 years later. So we wanted to bring it to you to see if you as a board, because you've had some experience with this, to see if you had any questions or if you wanted to make any modifications to it.
Was there any feedback from staff in the video training that might affect any language in here?
Not that I recall, Dr. Cobbett. Okay. But like I said, if you recall, we probably had 4 sessions and lots of staff input when we developed it. So this wasn't a quick, one-off, and we did get a lot of feedback and input. And I think we even took it to the Digital Citizen Committee.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So Kevin really, Digital Environment Committee.
So if somebody has an organizational account and, they're posting completely appropriate content, but comments on that content become inappropriate for any number of reasons, that's
Because that's the part you can't control, right?
right. And so is there a mechanism to, if there's, abuse or discrimination or, completely inappropriate language, is there any responsibility to go through and from the employee and remove that stuff? That was one thing I was wondering about, because
When it's attached to an organizational
it does
account list.
become attached to the organization then.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's it's not super frequent, but when it happens, it's sometimes very
When it spreads very quickly, when something that happens. And that's, what my general advice is with anything relative to social media is if you can control the message, but if something that's being posted back could be disparaging to you, the school system, or undermine your ability to do your job, then I think you do have a responsibility to monitor it and remove it. Now, I don't have a Twitter account, so I don't know the mechanism as far as removing it. So I know Kevin has a little bit more experience in that. So Kevin, have you given advice or had some experience relative to that topic?
So good morning. I think some of this is medium specific or platform specific. If somebody were to tweet a response to my tweet, I don't think I can have any other control than to personally block that person. If I happen to have like we have an FCPS Facebook account, so if responses start to come in there that are inappropriate, I assume we have the ability to take them out of there. I don't
We
do
do.
Facebook. Yeah, I don't do Facebook personally. I'm sorry.
The FCPS Facebook account, for example, is not, there can be tons of abusive language in there, but it's not removed. And I think, I don't understand where that fits into here, right? Absolutely, you can't control a community conversation, but it's on your social media, it's on the organizational social media account. So I don't know.
Well, on the FCPS Facebook account, we do have a disclaimer that says we reserve the right to remove any information that could be, I think, profane, or if it would reveal student confidential information. But the rest could be deemed protected under First Amendment, because people do have a right to say, what the heck were you thinking calling that snow day, or going virtual school? So that's protected in the First Amendment. So we did a lot of research in that area when we wrote that disclaimer, and that you kind of have to be very narrowly tailored in what you do remove, because it does have First Amendment. But we felt comfortable saying if it would breach, student information, or if it was deemed vulgar or profane. I think those are the two safety areas. So it was my understanding that that is reviewed and monitored, but it should be narrowly focused as far as if you're removing comments.
But removing people, are we in a similar situation as an elected official? Like Governor Hogan had removed people and was required by the court to stop doing that. I don't know about a corporate Facebook account like ours, whether we have that right or whether we have to allow people to post, but we should be able to edit their posts, remove them if they're foul language or inappropriate.
Right, because that would be against the mission of the school system. And
Right.
so we would be, so if we're removing it or blocking someone, we would have to justify it by it was disruptive, contrary to the mission of the school system, lewd, or infringed on the rights of others.
Right, but removing versus blocked, can we
I think,
block?
well, I would not recommend it unless,
Okay.
People continue, because then obviously, let's say I'm doing it and I'm gonna do it 100 times a day. And it becomes then, you're literally gonna hire
Right.
somebody full-time to
Yeah.
just continue to block that person. So I think you would show, did I have a good faith effort to narrowly tailor how I was gonna restrict your speech? And I told you why I was gonna restrict it, and then I gave you notice that if you keep doing it, I'm gonna block
Right, yeah.
you.
You went through the steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would want us to go through a lot of steps before blocking. 'cause
Liz,
think-
I agree. I don't necessarily see it here, but is there a place in here where you think some language could be inserted to achieve that end? Or is that giving more direction to staff than it is actually creating a policy for our system?
It's a gap I see. I just don't feel like I don't have solution language, I do think that,
Could B5C be the location where that's covered? So this is for organizational use of social media. B5C says, I'm sorry, not B5C, B5G. Regularly and routinely monitor their sites to ensure they are appropriately maintained. And I think what I'm hearing Ms. Cannon say is you may view the comments on Facebook and people feel that something should be removed, but under our narrow approach that Ms. Cannon's laying out, they may not be. And so are we taking that targeted approach to pull those things out of there?
Well, 6A says malicious, obscene, threatening.
Right.
But that's directed at employees.
Employees posting. And see, that's,
Yeah.
like I said,
So is 5.
one
Kevin.
would argue, how you're gonna govern the speech of an outside person that you don't have authority over. And that's where the disclaimer on our Facebook page comes in. But then we have a responsibility that if we remove it or censor it in some way.
I hate social media.
Well, and I
It
like
has
that.
its challenges.
That I think there is a statement, consistent with the philosophy, all employees and students are expected to use social media in a civil, respectful, and appropriate manner that does not infringe upon the rights of others. So this is to govern the behavior of our employees. When outside individuals post it, we're governed by the First Amendment. And so if we censor or squelch it, then we have to do it based on respecting their rights of free
Yeah.
speech.
I think that's where we're sitting, between those two rocks.
a lot of rocks.
Yeah.
This job is about rocks.
So I have no problem with anything that's in here, the name change, and this was a good discussion, but not one that's going to change anything in my mind, unfortunately. So move to this for consent. Consent?
Yeah, there weren't really big
There's
substances.
Right.
editorial
Nothing
changes.
substantive.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Dr. Coppett.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. The next policy is 423, and I asked Mr. Blendell to come in case you had any questions about how this is applied or anything relative to our responsibility under the law. So this was one that we had not yet put in the format. So now we are doing a pretty good job with, we're pulling now things from the 400 series, and, overall, I think the progress of the policy committee was definitely the right way to go as far as the consistent updating of our policies, because we're in a very good place as far as being, and when you think how many policies you all have,
Yeah.
and we've hit at this pretty well. So we did put this in the format that the board adopted. You'll see that we made a couple little modifications, and then you'll see relative to this has a lot of legal references, under Safe Schools Act, et cetera. And we have a very comprehensive regulation that accompanies it. So do you have any questions about this in general, or anything as far as the application of it?
My initial question was, I was a little confused why this just isn't kind of part of the disciplinary and isn't more of a procedure and a reg.
I think
'Cause-
the law says the board has to adopt a policy.
Oh, it does, okay.
Yeah, I think, isn't there like
Yes,
scary
it
Maryland
does.
laws on this?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have to have, okay.
Yeah.
So, the only part that's missing is, identification of a gang and the process to do that without, to do that in a way that doesn't contribute to, bias or stereotypes. Because I didn't see that in here.
Yeah, and so this is based on the model policy to address gangs that's referenced under the Safe Schools Act and the documents that Maryland provided. And so I don't know, and that's not to say we can't add it or modify it, but what were you thinking? Relative
Well, I was
to
thinking
adding-
that we start with, the definition is 3 or more persons. And I will admit to you, I did not look at the Maryland model.
Of 3 or more persons.
So it's like this policy
Either.
kicks in after you've identified that you have a gang or gangs.
Right.
So it's that process right there that I'm confused about.
Scott, you want to respond to that?
So the state law says it's not illegal to be a member of a gang. It's illegal to act on behalf of that gang and commit crimes. But to identify a gang, there must be 3 or more individuals that's part of that group. But the state's policy doesn't say that you must identify what gang they're a member of.
Right,
Is
we're
that-
not profiling. We're not looking for colors, we're not looking for tats, we're not looking for drawings on books and things like that and backpacks, because that would be profiling and that would be showing bias and discrimination. This is identifying based on the activity
Yeah.
of people.
Criminal gang.
That's what I got from it when I first read it. Because I know there was a time when we actually banned certain bandanas from schools and things because of the colors, because they were local gang-related colors. That became a problem in Georgetown shirts. And we went through a variety of things with the clothing, but that,
You just raised a good point, too. We should probably cross-reference the dress code policy, because we do have something in there about gang attire.
that's where you're walking your toes up to that line of
Yeah, I mean, gang
profiling.
attire is.
Yeah.
And
When it has to be identified gang attire, it can't just be, I heard somebody somewhere
Oh,
wore
exactly.
this. It has to be identified by.
So we don't right now in practice, if we talk about in practice, we don't have, if a student wears a certain piece of attire to school, at any school in Frederick County, no one is gonna say you have to change, unless it doesn't meet the dress code. But
Right.
Right.
the part of the dress code about gang colors, because I'm familiar that students have been asked to change, for example, at Heather Ridge or the Twilight program.
Right.
And is that if those students are not known to, right? So they could be a member of a group of kids who wears purple shirts. But if they're not known to be involved in crime, or have not, then this policy wouldn't kick in, right? And you can wear your purple shirts.
Yeah, I was just looking at the cross-reference to the dress code does reference criminal gang.
And to be in a criminal gang means you must have, there must be evidence that
Individually or
you in your
collectively
purple
engaged.
shirt with your purple shirt
Are gonna
colleagues
erupt in
have
bad stuff.
engaged in crime and been convicted, right? And proven. This is where because our
It says
preventative
criminal activity.
activities need to be,
A pattern of criminal activities. It doesn't say you have to be arrested. Because if you're, outside of school saying, I'm gonna go lift Amazon packages while people are at school or work, that's criminal activity. I'm not caught, I'm not arrested, but that's still gang
Got it.
activity. Let's see. Here.
So I just added, it could be a totality of the circumstances. So the clothing that they're wearing, the bandana that they're displaying, while that in itself is not proof of involvement or activity within a gang, it's the totality. Is that going to be a disruption to the school day because they are intentionally using that item to cause a disruption within, with other students, with other individuals in the building? And that's for safety purposes. You
Right.
would consider that to ask the student to remove it, take it off, change. And I think the Heather Ridge incident is more so they wear a uniform there, so they're asked all to wear the same uniform and within those boundaries.
Do we want to bring this to a work session so that everybody can see how it's been updated and weigh in on it? Or do we want to just put it on consent and let somebody pull it if they want to ask questions? Don't rush me all at once here.
I think we should talk about it in work session. I think folks should be aware of it.
Yeah. I don't think it'll take much time.
And what we can do is also attach the reg,
Yeah,
and that way too, you
that
can
would
see
be
a lot
nice.
of detail in the
Right,
reg.
right.
And then we'll invite Scott back.
I thought you were here to protect us today. I wasn't sure why we had.
I'm always here to protect you.
All right, Scott, so stay tuned. Faye will let you know when we get that scheduled.
Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so policy 405 was reviewed within Dr. Alavito's division, so you'll see that there are small edits on the front, but the most significant edit is 405.2. But before we look at that, in 405.3 and 4, I think we moved over, merging language from policies 422 and 433. So that commencement exercises, graduation honors, you had 3 different ones, and we thought it would be a good idea for one-stop shopping to put it
Yeah.
all under here. So Faye is really good. I'd love to tell you I take credit for that, but she, as she evaluates that, she'll naturally merge some things and then make those recommendations to me. So I really appreciate and value that. But Dr. Alavito also said that you had another change you wanted to just toss out as well, and that way then we'll review it all at once.
All right, good morning.
Morning.
Pretty easy edit. On page 2,
Okay?
the nature of our state assessment program changes rapidly. And right now is no different because we're not even, our assessment timelines have been pushed back significantly. So I would recommend on page 2, when it says Maryland High School assessments means, I would take out the words the HSA, park, or other. Because the names of the assessments continue to change, and we currently have no assessment called the park assessment. Maryland High School assessment is a very generic term that is used by the state and can be used by locals to describe whatever they may call the test in the
Okay.
long run. Further, we have a reference to refer the graduation requirements for public high schools in Maryland,
Uh-huh.
and we linked the MSDE document. That's completely outdated. I would strike that entire section.
Okay, just take it out. Okay,
Yes.
that's your recommendation.
The graduation requirements for these assessments are always updated in COMAR, so if we wanted that level of detail, we could go there. But I think the bottom line is this policy says there are high school assessments, they're in 4 areas. You must, either pass, take the alternative, do the bridge program, or receive a waiver. And sometimes, and right now, they're waivering entire classes of students,
Right.
so.
And we can actually, because we've said see Comar 13A030202, which is tricky to get to outside here, we can link Comar, right, Faye? Can we? Okay.
Is that citation appropriate to what Dr. Alavito just said? That the graduation requirements issue wouldn't be there, and that they don't have the terms HSA or Park on there?
Comar would be updated. Their guidance document is not.
Yes,
Okay.
and that's the part,
Got it.
and that's why I'm always comfortable linking to Comar versus guidance documents, so
Yeah.
we'll add that. Thank you, Jamie.
Sure, and then I think, let me look if there was one more thing. Kathleen wondered if you wanted to cross-reference Regulation 434 alternatives to four-year high school enrollment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
She also inquired as if you wanted to put that Maryland high school assessment with the definition on the front, first part of the policy where you have your definitions.
Uh-huh. Add what definition?
Well, right now, we have it in the body of the text on page 2 where we say Maryland high school assessments means.
Means, okay,
And is that more a definition, and should it be
yeah,
at the front?
good, yeah, I would recommend that.
Well, we say that taking and passing the Maryland High School assessments is part of C1, and it lists them, so why do we list them again?
To be awarded, to meet the graduation, meet the taking and passing Maryland. Yeah, do we need, see where it says state assessments up at the top, Jamie C. Do we need this Maryland High School assessment section at all now?
So may meet the graduation assessment requirements. The only relevant piece in that statement is that you take the assessment when you receive the credit. And so if you wanted to somehow add that into
Mm-hmm.
the first one,
Must meet the graduation.
or does section C actually go better after the section on the Maryland high school assessments? Because then you're getting
Oh, yeah.
into how you, the variation of how you can meet them.
So just the initial paragraph under the Maryland High School assessments, it's underlined. Don't bullet the items and don't have you move the definition,
Right.
and then have to be awarded a Maryland.
Yep,
So
To be
you-
awarded.
That
Got
would be
it.
the introduction, and then the rest of that stuff that's at the top there under C.
Got it. Yeah. So flip the 2, take out the bullets, put the definition on the front page.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
I had a question about what's the new 405.4, the last page, graduation, honors, and awards. The Maryland Business Roundtable for Education, those credits still applicable for students who have met the necessary requirements? It is?
and Kathleen did leave it in.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. Sometimes these things fade
Change.
away.
Yeah.
And they change. So including the 2 other pieces, commencement exercises and graduation honors and awards, I don't think that's too controversial. Ms. Barrett, Dr. Jarman, the inclusion in there is fine. And then the edits that we just talked about will come, you bring this back to us for that. I didn't catch the regulation 434, where would that be
That would just be at the
addressed?
bottom, like, so that if people were seeing corresponding regs
Oh,
that.
down here on the,
Yeah, on
okay.
the bottom grid
Got it.
part, we'll just add that.
If I could, I think one of the most important things here is that the policy, instruct or otherwise direct, recognizing the change in requirements that's happening, that we have a way, that there's a mechanism to make sure these are communicated to parents and families and students who need to graduate.
Yeah.
And I would just think that there's got to be a way to have, you know, and constant updated graduation requirements will be available at fcps.org. Or will be distributed by your guidance counselor. It'd be distributed by every guidance counselor at the beginning of the school year. There's just got to be something in there that gets it out to the people who need it.
What do I need to graduate?
And that's one thing. So, I think.
Yeah, we could make a statement about communicating annually. All updates would be communicated on an annual basis.
Yeah, I think
And, yeah,
the purpose statement talks about to assure the promotion and graduation, and that's not going to happen if people don't know what they need to do. And I know there's a lot of communication with students to do that, but, you know. That's all otherwise.
Well, do you want to end with, you know, I mean, just like you said, you know, the board will review this policy every 2 years. Do you want to indicate that this policy and the expectations for graduation will be communicated, you know, via, you know, do you want to say annual notification provided to parents? Do you want to say on your FCPS website? Do you want to get that detailed, or what do you think?
When we change regulations, we usually send out a notice.
Yeah.
Do we do it on Find Out first?
Yeah.
That's what we should say.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, well, that's a given. We do that anytime you change it. We send out a find out first saying the board recently reviewed this policy and have made changes, and then we give a little,
But we may not review the policy
Oh, I
next
see.
year. So
Okay.
let's put it in there that we're going to do this every year.
that you want to review your graduation requirement policy every year?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
up-
similar to like the social media one?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that'll trigger then the notification.
Yeah, because we can, if we can put it in there, but we need to institutionalize it.
Okay.
So, do you folks want to lay eyes on this one more time? To make sure it says what we want it to say? So come back to us with this, if that's okay, guys? Thank you, Dr. Oliveto.
absolutely.
So the board will provide review of this policy and provide communication to the community of requirements. Okay. Just want to write myself a little note so I didn't forget. Oh, wow, we are just moving right along. Do you want me to give a little quick overview, Mike, or do you want to start with the Title IX scary information we learned?
You're going to have to do a long overview, not a quick one. But we had a Legal Services Association meeting with the Maryland Association of Boards of Education on September 14th. It was a teleconference. But in there, the first hour was dedicated to Title IX new sexual harassment regulations. And we had an expert panel of 4 different people. I believe they were all attorneys for those districts, as you are, from North Carolina, from Pennsylvania, from Ohio, and Tennessee. And these folks have all been working on the new requirements for Title IX, which will change our system's way of addressing Title IX enormously for sexual harassment investigations. The athletic directors can no longer, or should no longer, be part of be a Title IX coordinator, because this triggers an investigation that is different than the principal calling the students down and saying, so what happened, and okay, this is, let me take your statement, and then a student may get suspended. This triggers legal rights
For both.
For both. So all of a sudden, it is no longer just a disciplinary issue with the school. And so the athletic director really is not the person to handle this. It has to be probably a professional within the system that is acquainted with the entire process and can take the process along. Because we oftentimes have issues where someone in a building gets bullied or something, and then the parents get upset that that child is still in school with them. This is going to create a situation, or could create a situation, where these two people who are antagonists, I guess is one way of putting it, in a legal situation, are in the building for a year while this process moves forward. So it changes the process. Now, the specifics of how it changes the process is not mine.
And so I just want to show a visual. So this is a beautiful 7-page flow chart of what the attorney said. If you have a complaint here, this is where it goes. And if they say, no, you can't process my complaint, then the Title IX coordinator has to step in and say, then I'm making it my complaint, because we have to investigate, even if you say you don't want me to. And it also shows, too, that you have to have 3 different people. So the Title IX athletic person can still evaluate if the dispute is about disparity under Title IX for athletics, but cannot be the person to investigate sexual harassment. And it used to be that you could have a Title IX person that would start the investigation, investigate, and then make a conclusion. Now it has to be 3 different people. So you have to have the Title IX coordinator that communicates and trains on Title IX. It has to be a separate person to do the investigation, and then a 3rd person that's a decision maker to say, let me look at your investigation and I'll tell you if I think it measures and meets the criteria. And then there's also 2 avenues in the flow chart that said, here's the victim and the supports that you have to give the victim. And I would say, pretty much we have followed that. Most sexual harassment policies do. But then, the perpetrator has certain rights, and you can't make assumptions, relative to that. And then there's a very short period of time that you have to conduct the investigation, do systemic training, and then almost have what they call a Title IX team around this. And there's things that are K-12, and then there's things that are much bigger from a responsibility for higher ed. And the 4 attorneys that presented were excellent. And what they did is they took 1,300 pages of regulations. That's how voluminous this
Right.
new regulation is. And the one attorney said, I worked on this all summer, advised my board, and then took 4 weeks off.
Right. Yes.
And so we, as a group of local attorneys, have been evaluating the Title IX regs. And so and most of the policies are no less than like 27 pages long. So the nice thing is, I'm so glad, and Liz, I think it was your idea. Remember when we separated out the sexual harassment policy for students and one for employees? That's going to help us relative to that. And a lot of our language and our processes is very much, you have to treat it seriously, ensure investigation. But the new layer of responsibility is on training, appointing people, and what components have to go into the training every year, et cetera. So we are working through this, and I will certainly bring a draft to the policy committee, but we're still continuing to work out. And I really commend Steve Bounds from MADE, because he did pull together what I'd call an expert panel that plowed through the regs to give us some good advice, to now give us some model policies that we can kind of pull together as a draft. So I can easily write a policy, but now we have to identify 2 in the organization, training people, because like most colleges have or most systems have a Title IX department. Or it's under diversity and inclusion, like I teach at Hood, we had to watch a video on the new Title IX regulations, and it popped up, and they have somebody dedicated to just that. So that's another little layer of challenge, but certainly we'll make sure that we do that. So it was good, it was timely, but it's very comprehensive, and I will be working on that in the next month to then bring it first to the policy committee, because it'll be a lot for us to review.
Yeah, there were a lot of standards that we have to meet in there. This once we get this policy created and we start the process of training, it has to be posted to our website.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Everything has to be posted. And if we use anything, we have copyright issues that we're going to have to deal with borrowing from other people and/or using an organization. And in the investigation itself, there are at least 2 10-day portions that are requirements that have to be met. Things have to be done in a timely fashion. There were, there was just so many. I took 5 pages of handwritten notes during this meeting, and I thought I was just going to be listening. You know, I go to these things just to see what's up and be entertained. But
And then
this
Mike,
was really tough.
did I hear it correctly that it said that boards can be personally now named and liable if you don't meet the requirements of
Yes.
the regs?
Yes.
I didn't quite know what that meant, because I thought the board as an entity can always be responsible, but I thought, well, I'll have to dive into that a little bit
Yeah, I thought they
more.
said individuals.
Yeah.
So,
So
Which seems odd to me, but anyway, so I want to look
me
at that.
too.
beyond completing the policy
Yeah.
and creating a process,
Mhm.
I mean, is this a resource issue? Because this is, who would be right now our Title IX person? Is
The
it,
Title IX person is listed as Curtis as the EEOC officer. A lot of times they're a director of human
Sure.
resources, but I do think I think it's
Yes.
a full-time job.
I think yes.
yeah, and so I think that's another conversation, because I also think that given the amount of work and responsibility and, we're going to have to, that's going to be a full board conversation in terms of figuring out where that person's going to be and budgeting for the position and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And what kind of background we want.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting that, so in most cases, athletic directors have led the investigations at schools.
No, only if there's an allegation of disparity
In
in the
athletics.
softball versus the baseball team.
Yeah.
Athletics, because there's a Title IX
There's
rung
always
that
that.
says, pardon me?
There's always that. But
Yes.
And so typically Kevin
Mail was
Kendro,
fine.
or the person in that individual, in consultation with my office, we review that and we respond to Title IX allegations as it relates to disparity in athletics. So that's, you kind of look at a 2-prong approach under the Title IX, but this is primarily is discrimination based on sexual harassment versus athletics.
Okay, and pardon my, beyond sexual harassment, what about a report of a sexual assault?
Yeah, no, that would be included
Yeah.
as well.
And so at the school-based level, if there is a report of a sexual assault, how does that, understanding how that hits the privacy and discipline areas,
Yeah.
as well as the new Title IX regulations? Because under these, it's almost as if more people know then, right? More people are involved.
Yeah.
And so you alert the police too. But
Well, the
title,
victim alerts the police. I mean, it just depends. If
But
you're
the
talking
Title
student to
IX
staff, or, I mean.
right, but what if a student is assaulted or reports an assault and goes home from school after the assault has occurred, or the
Right.
report of the assault, and tells a parent, and they call 911 from home?
Right.
These are, I think these questions in terms of the reporting gets a little complicated, and being ready for that.
I'm sure in the 130 pages of this
Yeah,
reg,
I
they'll
just,
probably define it.
I just think in this meeting, we've only talked about harassment, but I think we need to talk about,
Well, sexual assault can be a form of sexual harassment if you look at the current definition. It's offensive, harassing, bullying. It can be verbal, it can be physical. So we've had sexual harassment complaints filed where if you've grabbed me, you've sexually assaulted me. And so that is sexual assault and sexual harassment.
right.
And it's defined in the legislation according to Kenna. So I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's not, I don't think there's been a major change in the definition of sexual harassment. This is more in the investigation, reporting, and training. And And probably the biggest one, now, we have always taken that if somebody raises the complaint and says, but I don't want to use my name and I don't want to file a complaint, our response has been, but we have a responsibility as a system to address behavior, and, you know, because our board, you know, we have a stance that we will have an environment free of harassment. And so that we still do investigate it, but we don't use that individual's name, but we do approach the person, we see if there's corroborating evidence, et cetera. But this actually says, you now slot the name in of the Title IX coordinator that says, it's my complaint, I'm filing it, and that way, it gets that documentation, investigation, it runs through that formal process, just like someone filing the report. So I think that was pretty big. That was a pretty big change, and an important one, I think.
I think raising the level to an evidentiary standard that is similar to legal courtrooms standards, I think puts it in a situation where it's equal to what would happen with an assault. I think it raises the standard a lot.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Just again, given the complexity of this, given the newness of it, it is not, I mean, we'd have to deliberate upon this as a full board, but I don't think it's appropriate just to create this as an add-on for anybody's job description, right?
I
If we're
couldn't
gonna
agree
do
with you
this, if we're gonna do this in
Yeah.
a way that's, you know, with fidelity to the law, and then we need to have,
You know, because I will share with you part of it, and why I wrote down the names of all four of those attorneys who have already advised the boards is because, you know, you can do a sample, and then, you know, you can easily, look, I can copy a sample, but I guess I was looking at retaining someone to more globally walk us through everything that we need to do. And when they said they literally spent 2 months doing it, I don't want to spend 2 weeks doing it,
Right.
and I want to rely on that expert opinion, you know, and I do think Steve Bounds did a good job picking 4 people that dove into it, and that's all they did. But they clearly then indicated the staff that was involved at the school system, and they kept referring to it as a Title IX Diversity and Inclusion Department. And that department then not only does the policy, but does that systemic training, that awareness relative to the topic, which I think happens when you have a department devoted to it. So do you want to then schedule this as at a work session as far as this is something that we need to certainly comply, build a policy? Do you want me to draft something and then take it for discussion? Because it sounds like there's 2 pieces here relative to the resource part of it and the policy part. So tell me the order in which you want us to address it.
I think this is a big job for you. So I'd like you to let us know where you are in this. And if you're comfortable with the material that you have going to a work session, I'd like everybody to be aware of it. If you want us to review what you have and see what input we might have, then we can bring it back to the policy committee for just our immediate review, and then obviously it's going to have to go to a work session. So I personally would like to leave that up to you. I don't know about my colleagues.
I would like to come back here. I'd like to draft, I want to take my time with it. I'd like to draft something, and then I would like to have one of the attorneys that was on the panel review it and give me some advice about then guiding into next steps. What were some best practices? What did she learn along the way? And that's that, and then bring that back to you. That would be my preference.
That would be great.
Okay.
Faye, when is our next meeting? Okay, so at 12:06, we are adjourned till October 21st.
Okay. Thank you.